In today's video we are going to be doing a chit chat regarding some PCs and nothing to do with Zalman. This is just a random box. Let's chit chat about it. Let's go. It's already a little bit of a time ago that I've picked up this computer from Haima Computers. It's a Dutch store that sells all kinds of mini PCs. Yup, and for not a lot of money. However, I think it's going to be a really interesting product. Because this is the HP mini PCs with the AMD in the inside. Yeah, it's also called the Elite Desk, and in the inside we're finding the Elite Desk, the 705 G4 35 watt desktop mini PC. But what makes this thing really interesting is because this is a very tiny form factor with an AMD built in. At the front we're having two USB ports and USB-C, headphone jack out, microphone, an on and off switch. At the back we're finding USB port, enough, like 4 of them, and even a high-speed one if you want to use an external drive. So having display out, and whoa, this thing has a lot of display outs when it comes to that, and an RJ45 when it comes to connecting of the internet and updating with Bodacera, for example, and over here we're having the input for the power supply. They're just using the generic power supply there, like the HP ones that we have seen many times before. The HP version is, let's see if we can find how much voltage it is. And I think it's 90 volts or somehow. Yep, there we go. It's over here, 90.5 volts with the all famous, let's say, connection, like all of the HP PCs. So everything is in here with even a business card of Mr. Haima. I don't know if he has some more of these HP-based PCs because it's happening a little bit as of a time ago that I actually picked it up. But let's connect it and let's chit chat how we can put some really cool emulation. Bubble wrap. Yeah. Construction wise, these things are just great to open up, to clean, and just the way how this actually is going to be looking. And yeah, opening it up, you need to remove or loosen up the screw. You can just slide it open like that. And this way we can just get into the system and just going to be, let's say, adding, let's say, storage if you want to. So when it comes to this particular one, you can just actually see is that there is no bracket inside of the case, so we cannot add a drive in here, or I'm guessing there is not an option. So, well, seems to be not. So when it comes to the inside part, you can see we do have some storage capacity of an NVMe, so you can flash the Bodacera on NVMe. You can just slap it in there if you want to. So when we replace the battery, if you is going to be needing, we can remove this piece and we can also get into the RAM modules. When I purchased this, I said I want to have a dual channel, and that is actually what I bought with this. So he's using 4 GB for each, so in total 8 GB. And yeah, let's get into some emulation with Bodacera and see how the effects. Because single channel memory is, what I understand of, slower. But we don't have this problem now, but let's let this thing back together. There are actually many different ways to play, but when it comes to, let's say, doing different combinations with Bodacera or Windows and emulation, so there are 2 different ways, let's put it that way. So the first hard drive is this white version with RetroBat, and with RetroBat we can install the original, let's say, like files of the hard drive that we're going to be needing onto the Windows, combining this through the USB port, and then we're going to be having a lot of fun with different emulators. That's the first way, but we're going to be doing it a different way, and that is going to be the second hard drive. It's going to be with Bodacera. In other words, we're going to be connecting this. We're not going to be using Windows at all because we're going to be booting it from the hard drive. Operating system and everything is going to be implementing in this. I want to be clear about the Bodacera situation, where Bodacera can be installed on all kinds of storage devices. If you have like an SSD 2.5 inch drive, a USB stick, or just a 3.5 inch drive, you can just do it all. However, with the SATA and the SSD, that is absolutely a very cool and fast way, but there's also, I think, like the most expensive way, because SSDs are still very expensive if you're getting into like the 2 terabytes and above that. At this point I'm making the video, where the normal 2.5 drives, and the reason why they are using that in China, because these things are super cheap. A 2 terabyte drive is not expensive, so you have a lot of storage for not a lot of money. The USB thumb drive is kind of similar, but I personally don't love this tiny model because it gets really hot. You have the different versions out there, different brands, some of them like having metal, let's say, casings, but an USB drive, depending on what you're going to be buying, it's also an expensive version to actually get yourself like a Bodacera, but it's an easy plug and play solution for a tiny image. And of course the 3.5 inch drives, you can get an external enclosure, put it in there, and having an external enclosure like the 2.5, only 3.5 is so much more cheaper. So let's say you're getting a 12 terabyte, and of course we're having the different drives that you can actually like pick up. Yeah, you can buy these things and you can actually just plug it in. You don't need to do anything whatsoever when it comes to setting it up. So what you see is what you're getting, or having these complete kits. And I think a couple of brands doing this. I think this is one of the familiar ones. I think it's called PowKeyPad. A PowKeyPad is just a plug and play kit. You can see like the hard drive, the cables, the controllers, just those PlayStation 2 chemical controls, even an instruction manual, how the operating system works, how you need to set it up. These controllers are not my favorite at all, where these are like the better quality and they feel quite nice and sturdy, but I must say that I personally just grab myself like a fake Xbox 360 control from AliExpress. Those are way better than those PlayStation ones. And the hard drive, this is a 500GB, but they also have 1TB and 2TB with different storage versions. So with Batocera we have so much stuff that we can actually play. Yep, from the old school 8-bit stuff, Intellivision, Commodore 65, MSX, you name it. With Batocera we can play absolutely a crazy amount of different games. So what you see over here is a very nice, let's say, overview of different systems and even different, let's say, collections like Doom. And we have all kinds of cool stuff, and this is not even the complete list. However, let's take a close look at the system settings and checking out what are we actually dealing with now. And dealing with, I mean how you're going to be setting it up. So first of all, if you're going to be having problems with the audio, you can just actually see you're having all kinds of different outputs. You need to switch between them to figure out which of the outputs is the one that you're going to be needing for having the right setup for the audio. It's always a little bit of a hassle, and only need to do it once. If you have done this, you need to restart and you actually can fix the main issue of your audio problem. Another thing I wanted to check out is actually what kind of software are we running on this. We can find this with information in the system settings. So in the settings over here and the information, so we have an overview of the image, how much space we're having. The temperature is 30 Celsius at the moment, so that's quite good for a mini PC of this size. Normally they are like 40-50 Celsius, of course, depending what kind of brand. So we're running the AMD Ryzen 3 Pro 2200 GE, but we're having the Radeon Vega graphics. And that last part is going to be interesting because maybe now we can even do a little bit better upscaling than most of those Intel things that we have reviewed here on the channel. So let's get into it, but let's start off with some basic gaming. So we're starting off with some really wicked stuff. So we're pressing start, we have the option to see what we can actually do for turning it on. We can play old school Game & Watch games on the Batocera. That is something completely wicked. I have no idea what's going to be happening now because I see that my D-pad is moving. Or I have no connection whatsoever with this. It is kind of cool. That's actually in there. And it seems to be working, and with the marquee and everything, or at least like this overlay, this is absolutely looking awesome. But let's move on to some other newer stuff. But let's move on to the Game Boy. What an amazing system. I have been spending countless hours on the Game Boy with many different games, classic ones, but Battletoads is one of the system's games I love to play on these emulation devices. However, this runs perfectly, no problem whatsoever. Didn't implement any bezels, you can do that, there are so many different ways. Pixel filters, you name it, you can just change it out. And in particular, when it comes to some filters, it will look slightly better when you're going to be using this on a 55-inch television or some kind. Oh, another system is the Game Boy Color that I also played a lot. It was such a cool, let's say, game collection on there. I think one of the games I played a lot was like the Mario, Tetris, Mortal Kombat 4. That's one of those games I can't go back to, but I just wanted to see how it runs with some Rayman. What a weird overall experience, where this is of course graphical, not better than the original game. It's kind of a cool game to be honest. I never played it. Let me know in the comments which games did you ever play for the Game Boy Color. But the emulation performance is perfect. For me, the Game Boy Advance was actually one of the last Game Boys I actually had and played on. I didn't really play that much on it, but when going back to the game collection, man, that's absolutely a massive game collection, and the overall quality was so much better than the previous games. Alien Hominid, a game that I've been playing on my PlayStation GameCube. Of course, they're like slightly looking better, but still the Game Boy Advance was such a cool system. And playing these games, man, there are absolutely an awesome different ways to play. But it comes not only this game, I think particularly when it comes to, let's say, playing games in general, the Game Boy Advance, they are a lot of fun. Oh, this is such a funny game. The Neo Geo Pocket is a system I personally experienced way later on, in my early 20s, and it was such a very cool game system with the tiny joystick, and I still love to play it sometimes. I do own only the Game Boy Neo Geo Color at this point, but the overall gameplay was quite good. Of course, it is not exactly the same experience because we now just have a normal D-pad, but Neo Geo Pocket was such a cool overall experience. Of course, Game Boy was so much superior due to simply having so many cool games. Like with the Game Boy and Game Boy Color, we also had the Neo Geo Pocket and the Neo Geo Pocket Color. So I have the Pocket Color original in box, but also when it comes to the LCD upgraded version, this is absolutely a very cool way to experience those old school games. Quality-wise, they're not bad at all. In my opinion, I think they're a little bit better than the Game Boy Color games. And I mean particularly when it comes to graphical part, but again, it's more like a personal thing. Maybe because I'm just a big fan of the Neo Geo games. But also here when it comes to the overall performance and emulation, this runs perfectly. And of course nowadays we do have like $20, $30 of a game stick that can do exactly the same. But let's take a close look at the Nintendo DS. A system I did own later on. I still own a couple of DS's, and man, the library, the same story like the Game Boy Advance, like Sonic Rush. Where I didn't like the new generation of Sonic games, this was absolutely an awesome game. And now with this configuration, if you have like a massive TV, this would be one of those cool ways to play. We did enable the bezel today, so we can just use the game and play it like it's supposed to be. Because with this game you're going to be switching between the two displays like that, and that's kind of cool. Of course we can mess around with it if you want to, so you can just actually going like switching with the joysticks if you want to, and you know there are many different ways. You can see like I'm freezing the stuff over here actually. But there are many different ways where you can even have one display on your monitor itself. There we go. Oh yeah. But this runs perfectly now on these PCs, and even on like a slower PC or a cheap one like this particular one, you can just run these Nintendo DS games perfectly without any problems whatsoever. But let's deep dive into some Sega stuff with all kinds of different systems that have been released throughout the years. And the classic games run perfectly only when it comes to out-of-the-box MOS system. It's going to be set to widescreen shenanigans. So I can see they're not using any very strange filters or whatsoever. This is just what you see, what you're getting. And emulation, of course, runs perfectly. So I started with the Sega Mega Drive or / Genesis, as many of you know that. It's kind of interesting to see that these games were so cool. Oh yeah, going full speed. And the slowdowns you can maybe see are not even the problem of the MOSs, or at least like the emulator, just something that happens in the game itself. Moving on to the Sega Game Gear. Yeah, with some Battletoads again. Man, if you're going to be looking at this game, compared with the one from the Game Boy Classic, this one is so much more superior. Oh, I can still remember playing on my Game Gear. It was such a cool thing. Absolutely an awesome device, very comfortable, very clunky, and it eats up batteries like crazy. But so the question remains, I do wonder something, if people are really going to be playing these old school games on this device, is it not more fun to actually play them on an old school handheld? However, beside that point, let me know in the comments, and we're going to be playing a little bit more, and you can just see that emulation is just perfect also on these devices, and no widescreen shenanigans like with the previous system. Just want to slap one guy with a stick and we're done. Oh yeah. Next up, 16-bit power. Oh yeah. And if you want to know how to play the game, you need to punch him in the face and kick him in the dick. That's how it goes. However, this was actually one of the first games I owned on the Sega, combined with Sonic the Hedgehog 1. One an epic duo of games. Where still Sonic was my favorite game. This was such a cool game for back in the day. It's very smart marketing to actually combine this with the Genesis or the Mega Drive. Powering up, getting to the stages, but I was getting really bored after some time with the simple reason I felt so annoyed that every single time I need to collect the power-ups. Because I love to be beefcake. Yeah. Ooh. It's kind of interesting to see that we need to do a little bit tweaking because the CD version has wide scene shenanigans. But we do have the amazing soundtracks of this particular game. To be honest, like I have a Sega CD with different games, but for me, the Final Fight and the Sonic CD, those are actually the two games I just play on these. Because they're just my favorites. I love it, man. It's absolutely great. And the soundtracks, oh. But when it comes to the fighting mechanics, I am more of a Street of Rage 2 fan when it comes to that. So, I hope you follow me here. CD version, Final Fight, but for the normal game, or the normal Sega Genesis, it's going to be some Street of Rage number 2. So when it comes to the Sonic games, I was a little bit disappointed. We didn't have any on the 32X. Yep, we have a Knuckles game. That's kind of cool with a new mechanic. But in the end, when you're going to be looking at it, this is absolutely not my favorite game. What would be cool, they're going to be making all kinds of, let's say, homebrew games on the 32X. Oh, that sounds so annoying. But let's try some MAME games, but also arcade. And start off with some Street Fighter the movie. This is absolutely a really wicked game, if you think about it. There is the game Street Fighter, where they made a movie about. But from the movie they made a game. Okay, so that's gonna really some mindfuck moments, but however. So when it comes to the game, it's absolutely awesome, man. I love it. It's so funny that it's not like that bad that we've seen with the Atari games, you know, stuff like that. It's actually kind of fun with the same kind of mechanics like the original games. So if you play the Street Fighter, you can just play it only. They're basing this on the movie, including the sprites. So it's a combination of Street Fighter and Mortal Kombat, you can say. We have seen this on some weird Atari games. But I'm always failing with this game. Yep, I'm always losing. They, by the way, ported this to the Sega Saturn, where I actually played it for the first time. And later on an older Xbox, I was just playing this in the MAME emulator. Such a cool game that you absolutely need to try if you're a big fan of the fighting game franchises. But next up, let's get into some MAME games. And these old games run on many different devices, including the games that I'm going to be kicking. This guy kicked me, or pushed me in the face twice. However, so when you're going to be play for the third time. Let's try this again. Okay, let's try this again. So what I wanted to say actually is that when it comes to this particular game, it runs on many different devices. Even an old Xbox, game sticks for like $20, $30, you name it. And where it's getting really interesting about Battlesera and PCs like this, or cheap PCs like this, you can play Killer Instinct, many games that we couldn't play before. So let's do also a deep dive into that, because that is absolutely something I was missing out for many, many years. My all famous game, the Mortal Kombat, like the one that I always tested out on those freaking Pandora's boxes. And that was like a hit or miss situation. But I think it's a little bit more demanding than other games, and that was one of the reasons. However, this runs without any problem whatsoever. I want to give you a freaking uppercut. Okay, then you're not really getting an uppercut. And yes, we can actually play the MAME games on this particular mini PC, and that's just absolutely awesome. However, I did have the option to play this on like a really low-end chips. So when it comes to this Tekken 2 game, okay, what I'm going to do now is like kicking her very slowly and very carefully. Yeah, but it runs perfectly. So let's move on to the more demanding Tekken games. But also this runs without any problem whatsoever. And yeah, man, it's just a lot of cool games that you can just play now. And that for a mini PC that doesn't cost a lot of money. It's just fun to deep dive through, let's say, all of these games where we had so many struggles with or couldn't even play on those very cheap basic games. But so far, no problem whatsoever when it comes to that. Oh, I messed up the combo. Yep. The only downside I always have with the Killer Instinct game that the audio is quite low, so I need to get into the overall, let's say, emulator to get a little bit better audio. But besides that, the games run without any problem whatsoever. Oh, by the way, I just want to be pointing out, I am just bashing buttons here over here. I'm still losing. Just punch her in the face. And of course, we have some moves that I can actually do, but moving on to the Killer Instinct number 2, that runs also great on just native resolution. And native resolution, we do have emulators at the option to actually have an upscaling situation, but that's not the case, what I understand of with this. So, but native, really, it runs perfectly without any weird hiccups whatsoever. Well, with the arcade part, we have so many different directions where we just tried out some, let's say, check and maim and other stuff that we have been seeing on many devices running great. Also, we can play some Neo Geo. And man, this system has so many very cool games. Neo Geo CD. A system I also own, and it's such a cool but weird overall experience, where a lot of the games are of course similar to the arcades. Some are slightly, like, say, different, where they have like lower quality, I will not say that, but having maybe less sprites and stuff like that. But over this Aero Fighters 2 game seems to be looking quite nice and no problem whatsoever. So when it comes to these basic stuff, and I can say actually basic, this runs perfectly without any problem whatsoever. Oh man, I love these shoot-em-up games. So when it comes to the arcade part, let's do a quick overview of some Atomic Wave with the Dolphin Blue game. I've been testing this many times on different devices, and it doesn't have any problem whatsoever with this particular system. Take note that you also need to set up certain files. And if you're going to be doing some wild, crazy, wicked thing, you can even upscale it with some of the newer emulators. But native resolution, it works perfectly, no problem whatsoever. And this is absolutely a very cool system. Not a lot of games, but the games like Dolphin Blue are a lot of fun. This feels just like a Metal Slug clone for me. Time for some NES part, and yeah, there are so many actually different ways we can just play this. A little bit of a bummer that automatically have it set to widescreen shenanigans, so that's unfortunate. But beside that, emulation is just great. You can implement different formats, but also bezels, everything can be changed out if you want to. But I already mentioned before, like 8-bit, 16-bit stuff, we have many different ways. Also the cheap game sticks, for like a couple of dollars, can be playing this. I think there are even dedicated NES plug-and-play devices that kind of cool features. But the same goes for the Super NES. This runs without any problem whatsoever. It's kind of interesting to see that when it comes to the aspect ratio, it's kind of weird because we do have like a massive bezel, or almost a massive bezel around it. Like particularly when it comes to the left and the right part and the bottom part. But also here we have no problem whatsoever, and if you just want to revisit these old school games, it's going to be a blast to the past. I'm just playing now with an Xbox 360 controller, that plays quite nice. I can still remember playing this game. A friend of mine had this on a multi-game card. Yep, they had multi-game cards, like a 4-in-1 it was, or 6-in-1, a very small one, but it was such a cool game. Turbo mode, yeah! Another system I have been seeing a lot of, let's say, cheap game boxes is Panasonic 3DO. And none of them, or most of them, are not able to run 3DO on full 60 frames per second. Where a game like Road Rash actually playing now, this is a game that has been ported to many different systems. So don't really need this to have it running on the Panasonic 3DO, but I think it's quite a good port when you're looking at it. Woohoo! See me flying! Oh. Yeah, he was walking back to his freaking motorcycle. Oh boy. That was one of the parts I really hated about this game. There we go. Woohoo! Personally, I never had an MSX, but this is the MSX1 with some 9042. So I do wonder how many people watching this actually had the MSX computer, because this is a completely different time area. I cannot even recall seeing this in some stores, but going back to this, it's kind of fun. And looking through the list, I did notice a lot of cool games, but of course some games are ported to the NES and many other systems, or we just have like the full original arcade versions. So I think it's just going to be like some pure nostalgia thing going on over here. Contra has been put into this list called MSX2 Plus, where I'm just going to be honest, I'm completely new with MSX, so I have no idea what's going on. But this Contra is not going to be one of my favorite games actually to play, because what's happening? Like, you're just stuck in this. I do wonder if this is the original MSX, or why this calling the MSX2 Plus. It makes no sense whatsoever. Oh, that's actually how it works. Oh, I was just thinking, why doesn't the freaking stage move? But when we're going to be looking into some more old school stuff, yeah, the PC Engine is one of those systems. We can play it on many different, let's say, game sticks nowadays, so that's not going to be the reason you need to build a PC like this. But this has so many very cool games. So when I understand of what's like in the time era of the 8-bit systems, but this thing has so many cool games that looks just amazing. And Jackie Genesis was one of those games I was playing. I discovered it, like I say, many years ago. And since then I'm just going to be always playing this. We had the Sega CD, but we also had the PC Engine CD, where we had like the amazing graphics, but having now the very cool remix music. I played this game so many times on the Sega Genesis, but I'm flabbergasted of the overall quality of the audio. But next up, we have been testing a lot of different older emulators, but we're going to be checking out some other ones. So we have been seeing all kinds of handhelds and basic stuff, but in this part I want to do a little bit of an upscaling. Yep. So we have all kinds of new, let's say, systems has been released throughout the years on Batocera, but let's go for example with N64 and let's do a little bit of an upscaling, see how far we can push it. N64 will run a native resolution, but how far can we push it and all the other systems? So let's find out. But how does it actually work? We're going to be holding the A button. So if we're going to be into the N64 list, holding the A button now, then we're going to be having the advanced options. At the right over here, we get an extra menu, advanced game options. We have different kind of emulators that we can implement. But some of them we can even do a little bit of an upscaling. And that's what we're going to be doing today. So random resolution has been set to 720p. We're just going to be looking into different emulator, let's say options, and see how far we can push it. And I think we do have like some really cool things going on over here, thanks to the GPU that comes with the AMD. This may be better than the Intel one. So first off, let's do a little bit of random resolution of 1920 by 4040, if I'm saying it correctly. So it's going to be some next level when it comes to that, see how far we can push it, and do we have a stable frame rate. Because of course we can do a little bit tweaking, we can even do a little bit more upscaling, but also downscale everything. However, let's get into some gaming. So a native resolution, this runs on many different mini PCs nowadays, so that's absolutely awesome. But one of the more appealing things to this AMD mini PC, that we do have like upscaling, and the 64 looks absolutely great. You can see that we have some minor stutters, but not to the point that it's going to be making this game unplayable. So Cruise in the USA is one of those test bench games that struggles on so many cheap game boxes. But let's go into some more gaming, because in this part I just want to do a little bit of an, let's say, different games on the same systems, because some of the games have like a slightly different overall result. I do see a little bit of stuttering going on left and right, the same with Cruise in the USA. But let's deep dive into some GoldenEye action. You can see it struggles, particularly in the beginning. But getting through the game, you see the game is just playable on this high resolutions. So if you want to have no, let's say, stuttering going on, what you can actually do is just like lower it in resolution, less quality, but we have like the better performance. So that's something you should, like say, consider for yourself. Whoa, see, and that's exactly what I mean. So with this resolution of 920 by 4040 is absolutely pushing the device itself to a limit. I have been doing all kinds of, let's say, upscaling and different mini PCs. Normally we only have the options where we're having, let's say, Intel with a powerful GPU combined, and we're having the options. However, for this really old mini PC, for that amount of money you're paying for it, it's crazy. Let's move on to the N64DD. In other words, this is a system that has been, let's say, tested out on many, let's say, cheaper game boxes. But with this, we're going to be putting it on 4 times high quality resolution. We do have the same kind of result when it comes to, let's say, the performance. We do have some weird stuff going on with the, let's say, overall quality of, let's say, the details. But getting into the game, also here. And so far I've seen like the higher, I'd say, overall upscaling what I can do, but you can see also the same result with GoldenEye. I do have an overall good emulation performance where we do have like some minor hiccups. With the Dolphin emulator and some GameCube, I just want to do something completely crazy. Where this is a really old specification of a CPU-GPU combination, we're going to be trying some 4K rendering resolution. But you can just hear with Soul Calibur that it struggles big time. It is playable to a certain level, but you know, this is one of those great examples, dipping to 45 frames per second. So what you're going to be needing to do is just lower it everything, maybe make it on 2K, or if you have like a little bit better luck, you need to have 1080p. But if you're going to be looking into some more demanding stuff, then we're going to be needing, let's say, 1080p. So let's switch to another game and I'll give you an example what I exactly mean with this. A great example is going to be testing out F-Zero GX. By the way, one of my favorite games to test out and also to play actually on my GameCube. So now we're going to be putting it on 1080p rendering resolution. Try 2K or 4040p and stuff like that, doesn't work at all. And we didn't have like overall great performance. However, 1080p upscaled F-Zero GX on this old PC seems to be running just fine. So let's get into the game, let's skip the intro. And I think it's absolutely an overall amazing performance, having even upscaling options with such an, let's say, low powered old school mini PC. Where I am just Team Intel when it comes to play, say, having a CPU in my Simon PC. I'm always like flabbergasted how good AMD Ryzen is. Even with this prehistoric version, the performance is crazy. If you're looking at the price you're paying for these mini PCs and having the option to do so many cool things. 1080p F-Zero GX, this meaning if you're going to have maybe a two-dimensional game, you can maybe do a little bit of 2K or maybe even 4K rendering resolution. But of course, you need to look into it yourself, do a little bit of tweaking for your favorite game to get the overall best performance out of this machine. But let's get into the PlayStation part. So start off with some PlayStation 1. And what I love about this machine, that we do have the option for 4K rendering resolution, making this PlayStation 1 game through the dock station looking amazing. And I think that is one of those really appealing things. If you're a big fan of the PlayStation 1 games, and you want to experience those old games in a 4K rendering resolution, you can actually do that in such a low budget, cheap way. So what you can also do is getting into, let's say, higher settings if you just want to tinker with it. Same story, like I told you a couple of times now, is that depending on what kind of game you want to play, maybe the two-dimensional game is even less demanding and we can have it higher than 4K. But so far this looks just great. And that's one of the more appealing things when it comes to a PC. And then we can do it with a low budget product like this particular old school AMD Ryzen. And this makes me personally really exciting. Moving on to the PlayStation 2, we have great performance with 1080p rendering resolution. And yep, you can do tweaking here and there, but I am quite satisfied with such an overall good performance with a Tekken 5. The game has never been looked so great, and then for such a low-powered mini PC, And that, I think it has to do thanks to the GPU, because this gives us so many cool new upscaling options. Dolphin, but also the PlayStation 1 and PlayStation 2 and many other systems.
Round 2. Fight.
But let's try another game, a two-dimensional fighting game, and yep, we're having over here 4K rendering resolution with PlayStation. So I had the option to do this with Tekken, but I didn't want to do this because I know the two-dimensional stuff is less demanding. But you can see full 4K render resolution, great performance on this mini PC. And that's what I exactly mean. We need to do tweaking and tweak your favorite game to a certain level that makes it still playable and look amazing. But how about PlayStation 3? I think if you're going to be having these low budget or very old, say mini PCs, some of them have the option to actually play. But let's start about the loading times. Because due over the course we're having over here, it takes sometimes forever to load up a couple of games. So in this case, I'm going to grab myself something to drink. And after a couple of times of trying to boot up the game, because in the loading it just froze up. But let's get into the gaming and let's see how the overall gameplay will be. But the overall emulation performance is surprisingly good. However, we do have very long loading times getting into the games, of course depending how big the game is itself. But with this game, yeah, we did have a little bit of a problem with that. However, in the game everything looks fast. But when it comes to, let's say, playing and just want to have overall better experience in PlayStation 3, you need to take consideration to get a more powerful PC itself. I've been trying on many different AMD Ryzen ones. And yeah, with more cores and more threads, we have like overall so many better performance. But of course, with a low power device like this, it's just amazing that we can actually even play PlayStation 3 now. And it makes this mini PC, beside the overall upscaling, very cool. Point out that we're just using the original native resolution now, as this was intended to play on the PlayStation. No with cool things added to it, because I think this is the maximum we can expect from such a low power device. PlayStation Portable with some crazy 4K resolution with just a basic game. Like I mentioned before, it's always a little bit of a hit or miss with these. So there are so many different games. So if you're having a God of War, there we're going to be needing a completely different setup than this particular game. But getting into some 4K rendering resolution with this awesome game, this works perfectly. Oh, I messed it up. Another game like Pac-Man, 10 times resolution. It's all possible, but again, what I mentioned before, we just need to do a little bit of tweaking with every single game. But how about when we're going to be playing a normal three-dimensional game? I've been messing with the settings quite a long time now, and I did notice with 1080p resolution we can actually play this no problem whatsoever. You need to do auto skipping to auto, otherwise it's going to be running absolutely horrible. So we need to do a lot of tweaking, but rendering resolution seems to be running as it is now just fine. And again, you can do a little bit of tweaking, maybe getting a little bit higher resolution, but it's kind of cool to see that we can have upscaling possible with this awesome retro game, because Need for Speed Rivals, oh man, yeah. So where Die Hard is actually a quite difficult one to play and emulate, we can do it on this mini PC without any problem whatsoever. So if Die Hard Trilogy works, there are many games that will run just fine. And think about if you're going to be using a two-dimensional game, that will be maybe have the option, if it was possible in emulator, we can even do it a little bit, maybe upscaling to higher resolutions. But the Sega Saturn runs absolutely awesome through the Yamaha Zero emulator. So we had 4K rendering resolution with the Sega Saturn, but how about when it comes to the Sega Dreamcast. So let's push this thing.
May lead to a perfect
We see some dips now at this moment. But let's get into the gameplay and see how the overall gameplay is. Already has some dips. 40 over here. Ooh. But this is just fun to experiment with it. But 4K Dreamcast, it's just too much. So we need to do a little bit of a lowering of the resolution. Okay, so it's clear that we can't do 4K with the Sega Dreamcast. Let's get into the Dead Alive and let's put it on 1080p. That's just a safe way to go to. Again, we can also do a little bit of a tweaking there, but I think it's just fine. 1080p, I can live with it. It looks amazing. Minor hiccup, but not with the explosion. But when it comes to the Elite Desk from HP, this is just a very nice, cheap solution to play games. Particularly when it comes to a newer generation of modern games, upscaling, you can do it. Plug and play with an Xbox controller, but there are many different solutions out there. Besides that, I'm very pleased with the overall result. And I think this is going to be maybe one of my favorite ones to actually play when it comes to a low budget solution. Let me know in the comments what you think of the AMD one, would you consider buying it, and it would be great just to see you for more testing on the channel, and see you in the next video.